Hi, everybody. Good evening or good afternoon or good night, wherever you are in the world. I'm really happy that everyone has joined us. And it's also great to see some familiar faces from session to session. And so I feel like we've already formed a nice little group and even I would say a little community of educators and people who are interested in learning more about these topics. So welcome. Just a refresh, a reminder for the newcomers. I'm Shuvi Hoffman. I work at the NLI, the National Library of Israel. And with me also for my team are Michal. Michal is under the title of Learning NLI. So she'll also be very active in the chat if you need anything, if you need technical support, if you have any questions, and hopefully also during the session and the end, we'll have some time for comments and questions. So anything you need. And what we're also going to do, we're going to shortly also share the feedback form in the beginning, so it'll already be in the chat. And this way, people won't forget to fill it out. And we really, really love to hear your comments and your suggestions. So take a few minutes at the end of the session just to fill it out. We really appreciate that. So we're going to get started. Today's session is about Novy God. And this is an opportunity for us to sort of learn more about Soviet Jewry. And I would say it's the story of them coming from the Soviet Union and all the protests and everything that was done to bring them to Israel and to other countries in the world. And what their story is now living in Israel, and maybe through Novy God sort of to explore some of the complexities of that transition. So what are we going to do today? We're going to talk a little bit about how posters and photographs are very powerful texts. We think of text usually as words. And obviously the National Library is full of books that have many, many words in them. But today we're going to sort of look at posters and photographs as a way of relaying a message, and sometimes a very powerful message, even maybe more powerful than words. We're going to get a glimpse into the story of Soviet Jewry. We're going to talk a little bit about Novy God and its customs, and introduce you to maybe something that some of you know about, something called Generation 1.5 in this context. And we're going to talk about how gradually Novy God is being incorporated into the Israeli culture and the Israeli calendar, and the process of that becoming more common and more mainstream today. So as the first activity we're going to be doing, we're going to start off with this Mentimeter. Michal will also be sharing the link to this Mentimeter in the chat box. So you can either scan this QR code with your camera on your phone if it's easier for you not to get off the screen, or you can do it through another tab in your computer. In a moment, I'm going to stop sharing this presentation and I'll share with you the Mentimeter. What you're going to see is a few images and a question about these images. So everyone get prepared with the link, and you'll see once I start sharing the Mentimeter, it'll be active. So if you don't see anything yet, that's okay. Okay, here we go. I'm going to share this presentation with you, and I want you to participate. Write in one word what this image means to you. What does it symbolize? In one word. It's very important to keep it in one word. And it's okay if not everyone participates, and I'll be going through the slides. If you miss a slide, that's also okay. So as we can see, this heart really represents for many people the word love. The more people write the same word, the bigger it appears on the screen. So that was the heart. We're on to our next slide. I see there are a lot of participants already writing their answers. What does this image symbolize? And as we can see, for many of you, it symbolizes stop. We're familiar with this from many places in the world where this is a symbol for stop. How about this? Okay, so as we can see, it's the Magen David, and for many of you, it symbolizes Judaism or something Jewish, history, Star of David, and we could go on. And our last slide. Okay, so we see a lot of different words here. The main word is Christmas. We also see Xmas, which is also Christmas, or a Christmas tree. And there are some other associations here that people have written: nature, winter, Lebanon flag, and Novy God even. But as we can see, the main image or the main association maybe is Christmas or a Christmas tree. Going back to our presentation, I think what we can learn, what we can learn from this little exercise that we just did is that there are images or symbols that are really associated with a certain idea or a certain value, or really an image can evoke some kind of emotion or give us some kind of message without even thinking about it too much. Our brains are already programmed to see that stop sign and know that that's what it means. It means to stop. And we're going to see today during our session that to some extent, that idea of seeing something for the first time and what that first impression is so powerful that it's really, really hard to undo that afterwards, even when you later understand that maybe that image can mean something else. And another aspect of that is that we're going to see how posters use that kind of, I would say, manipulation or that assumption that our brains go to a certain place, and posters usually use that in order to really connect to us and give us a strong message without actually going always through the process of thinking. It's sort of a very immediate thing that we almost feel something when we see something for the first time. So in that regard, I want us to watch this short video together. The sound should be good. I'm just gonna hope for some thumbs up just to see that it's working well.
אחי, איפה אתה בסילבסטר?
מי זה סילבסטר? אנחנו חוגגים נובי גוד. ביי.
נובי גוד? מה הרבנים חושבים שאני עושה? מה הצבא חושב שאני עושה?
תפאי תפאי!
קשה באימונים, קל בקרב. מה המשטרה חושבת שאני עושה? זה מים בטעמים?
מה מים? אתה כולך שיקור.
זה מים בטעם וודקה. ומה אני באמת עושה בנובי גוד? רוצים לדעת מה באמת קורה בנובי גוד? תבואו לחגוג איתנו בנובי גוד ישראלי.
אחי, איפה אתה בסילבסטר?
So let's talk a little bit about this short video that we just saw. Basically, we're going to talk about this group that produced this short video, and they're part of some, I would say, a movement in Israel for educating Israelis on what Novy God is, and in general, making the Russian culture that people from the former Soviet Union came to Israel and brought with them, and out of a place of respect and of getting to know them, and less as something that should maybe evoke some kind of emotion of antagonism or hesitation. So what is Novy God? Novy God is a holiday that is basically the new year. Many of you living in other countries in the world besides Israel are very familiar with this, the kind of the atmosphere that comes with celebrating the new year. And obviously it's celebrated on January 1st or the night before January 1st. There are a lot of customs and a lot of things associated with this day. And different people celebrate it in different ways. Novy God is actually in Israel starts at 11 p.m. because that's when it's midnight in Moscow. And it really comes to sort of symbolize the fact that the holiday itself originates in Russia and it's part of the Russian culture. And that's why people start celebrating already at 11. There are a lot of different elements to this holiday. And it's important to realize that this is the only non-communist holiday that was permitted under the Soviet regime. So this, for many people, is the symbol of their freedom, a symbol of the ability to continue celebrating together as families, as friends. There were times that it was under, that in the Soviet regime that it was not allowed, it was banned. And at some point it was permitted. And people really, in a place like the Soviet Union where anything that had to do with religion or anything, definitely with Judaism, but even other religions was banned and considered something that was going against the state. So it's really important to understand that Novy God really symbolizes for people who came from the former Soviet Union, their only secular holiday that really was allowed. What do people do on Novy God? Well, first of all, they have a tree, a yolka. It's an evergreen tree, and what it symbolizes is that even in the dead of winter, people continue to celebrate life and growing. And of course, it's decorated very nicely with ornaments. And there is also a custom for kids to get presents. They get visits from Ded Moroz, who is Grandfather Frost, and his granddaughter Snegurochka. You can see the image of them dressed in blue. That's their customary garb. And they come to the houses of kids and give them presents for the new year. Part of the customs of Novy God also include a toast for the new year, of course, festive foods, and people often binge on Russian nostalgic films on this night, just as a way to sort of, connect to that part of their identity. Basically, this is a holiday that really celebrates family and community. It's a way to start the new year together in a positive way. And again, keep in mind that this is the only holiday that was permitted for so many years. For so many families, this really became a symbol of them being able to celebrate anything. Let's talk a little bit about Soviet Jewry and their story. I'm sure a lot of people here in the crowd, maybe some even remember firsthand some of these events and some of these things. And some of us have heard this from our parents or maybe even our grandparents. But this movement for the Soviet Jewry's release from the former USSR, the big slogan was always, "Let my people go." And we'll see that slogan really follows and it really becomes like identified with this protest, which, by the way, was probably one of the most successful protest movements in the world in history. And because as we know, in the end, it was successful. And how does it all begin? Well, we know that life in the USSR wasn't always simple, and we know that there was also rise of anti-Semitism around World War I and World War II. But we know that what started in the 1960s is that also Soviet Jews could not celebrate and practice Judaism. One of the main examples for that was the fact that they weren't allowed to bake matzah for Pesach, for Passover. And we'll see that this idea of Passover is sort of like, it runs through this whole movement. And the fact that "Let my people go" is the slogan, I think is also part of it, because Passover really is the holiday that symbolizes freedom, slavery and freedom and being freed from our chains. And so the cry, "Let my people go," was really, really connected to this protest and to this movement. Refuseniks are those Soviet Jews who wanted to emigrate. They wanted to, most of them asked to emigrate to Israel, but the authorities wouldn't let them do so. They wouldn't give them visas, and some of them were tried and put away because they were accused of being spies or accused of treason. In that time, in these years, there are a few organizations that start being very active in the United States. And one of them, and maybe the first, is Cleveland Council of Soviet Anti-Semitism in 1963. Eventually, some of these organizations will all come together and really form what was called the Union of Councils for Soviet Jews in 1970. And each one of these organizations are very, very important to the movement. And the last one is I sent you an article about this one, the 35s, the Women Campaign for Soviet Jewry in the UK. And it's really important to understand that each one of these movements, each one of these organizations really had a great impact. And when people look back at this time in history, it's clear that people really fed off of the energy from other organizations. There weren't always in agreement. Some felt that there needs to be a more like harsh and radical response to the government in the Soviet Union, and some people thought it was you need to do it in a more diplomatic way. But in the bottom line is that everyone really came together, and we see, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with people who are involved in this, and a lot of photos and it's really a central chapter in the story of modern day Jewish society in the United States and in Europe and basically everywhere around the world. And soon we're going to see how that manifests also in Israel. So today we're going to focus, like I said, on two parts of our vast collection in the NLI, the posters and the photographs. So let's talk a little bit about what makes for a powerful poster. If I want to give, I have a message and I have something to say, and I really want people to hear my message, what do I need? So first of all, you're welcome to also share in the chat box if you like, along the whole session. Some of the things that make a powerful poster are, first of all, keep it simple. A poster can't have too many words. It has to be very straightforward. And of course, to some degree, very simplistic. People need to see that one image or that one slogan, and it needs to sort of be in their heads, and they take it home with them afterwards because it sort of sticks with them. Many times the use of color, a strong color or a specific color that has a certain association, will be used in order to enhance that message. And of course, the image that's chosen for a poster is crucial. And the text that's on the poster, again, it has to really be minimal. Usually posters are mostly the image, and then the text often is either a surprising quote or something that catches our attention, maybe something we didn't expect to see, or just something very powerful that sort of says that message in a very short and simple way. Of course, the whole point of a powerful poster is to evoke emotion and for us to go away after we've seen that poster with some kind of feeling. And the most important thing, I think, when you're designing a poster, and we'll talk about this later in the end of the session when we think about what students can do in this regard, if we're thinking about designing something, we really need to know our audience. So certain things that were relevant in the 60s and really struck a chord with people who saw it might not work today, obviously. You really have to know who your audience is and who you're aiming to. So let's look at this poster. This is one of the posters that are in the National Library Archives in the poster collection. And what I'd like for you to do is just really write in the chat box, like, what do you feel when you see this poster? What's the first thing that stands out? How does it make you feel? What's that first message that you get when you look at this poster? So I'm going to give people a minute to sort of just respond. And Michal, you'll share from the chat box because I can't see it as easily.
Okay, so we have screaming, crying out, yelling, anger, pain, desperate, detained, let them go once again, rage, barbed wire, imprisonment, anguish.
Okay, so there might be more as we go along and we can share more, and definitely all the things that you've written, there's in the center of this poster is a face, and it's known that the human mind can recognize facial expressions and faces in general. Often we see two dots and a line, and we know that that's a face, a smiley face or something else. We don't need that much for it to make out the face. And here we have a very clear image of a face. You can see that it's half dark and half light, and that also gives us a feeling of maybe someone who's in pain or in some kind of in some kind of trouble. Of course, the color red is the color of danger, the color of to be alert, and it really gets our attention. Of course, red also has to do with the communist movement, and the color red always symbolizes, many times symbolizes that as well. And of course, we see the barbed wire. I think the circle, there's something about the shape of a circle, which is also very universal, and it can be associated with a lot of different ideas. One of them is maybe that there's no way out. Of course, it could also symbolize something whole, something that really, when we see something that's a circle, we think of it, again, automatically as something whole. And here, the circle really represents them being imprisoned. And of course, the barbed wire. So what about the slogan, Shlach et ami? Shlach et ami, and again, this is a poster that was posted in Israel. And we know that let my people go is something that really, like we said, is a central part of this movement. Shlach et ami is a quote. It's a quote from when Moses is asking Pharaoh to let the people of Israel leave Egypt. Again, here we have that connection to Passover, to Pesach, where I think that Shlach et ami is such a deep, is rooted deep in Judaism, that for so many people, just the word Shlach et ami means so much already. It's almost like an image. It's almost like something that really automatically evokes so many things, so many emotions. We think about the Seder night. We think about being free. It's a basic right of all human beings to be free. And Shlach et ami really represents that. And not only for Jewish people, but in general, that idea of being freed from slavery. And we know that, for instance, in the United States, that also became something connected with other movements for freeing other groups. So we know that this is a very powerful image. I'm going to show you another couple of posters. We're not going to get into them as in depth, but you can see that also here we have the use of the red and the black and the chains that really represent people being imprisoned, and the face. This is another poster, and each one of these posters, when you get the presentation at the end of this session, each one of these have links to the full information in our NLI website, so you can learn more about each one of these posters if you wish. And the last poster I just want to share with you, again, you see the Shlach et ami, but it's shaped in the shape of a fire. The red, again, here symbolizes the people who are in trouble. And again, you can see the hands. I think it's a very powerful image. Almost looks like a child maybe drew these hands, and it really takes us back to something very primal and wanting to help. So if there are any comments up to this point, if anyone wants to share something in the chat box, or
Sharoni just asked a question about what do we know about the poster designers?
Oh, that's a good question. We don't. The truth is, in some of these posters, I don't even know who the actual designer was. But that is a good question to look into. I think the assumption is that some artists were involved in designing these posters, and I don't know, maybe for each poster we need to look into that more in depth. Any more questions or comments?
I'll send the links to the posters that we have more information about, so that you can read up more about them in the chat.
Yeah, each one of these on the bottom, the name of the poster is also a link that you can actually click and link into afterwards. So now let's look at a photograph. This is a photograph, of course, of Golda Meir, who was the prime minister. We see again the Shalach et Ami, the slogan. This is obviously in a rally where people gathered to show their support for Soviet Jewry, and to really protest against them being not allowed to emigrate to Israel. I want you to take a moment to look at this photograph and think a little bit about what it makes you feel. We looked at the poster. We thought a little bit about, what kind of emotions came up, and I want you to do the same for this poster. Take a moment, and you can write some things in the chat box. You can also just think about it a little bit, and in a moment, I'm going to also show you another picture from this rally. As you can see, a lot of these signs are in Hebrew, but there are also some in English and in Russian. And most of the ones in Hebrew say chofish, which means freedom, and other signs that call for the release of the Jews from the Soviet Union. What I want to ask you for a moment here is, which is more powerful in your opinion? By the way, this is a question we also asked students who we worked with on these on similar materials. What do you think? Which one is more powerful and why?
I don't know. I think the red really stands out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's something about that poster that really...
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to share? You're welcome to speak up, and you can also write it in the chat box.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you chose the two photographs tell such a different story, because in the first instance, it looks like a small, distracted crowd. They don't look like they're really rallying with energy or anything. And in the second picture, the second photograph, at least you see like the hordes of people and the posters that they're holding, and like there's more energy coming through from them. So if you just are counterposing these two images here on your slide, the poster is so much more effective. It's simple, it's direct, it's sort of aggressive. Whereas the other photo is like,
Right, good point. So Sharoni, what you're saying is that someone who chose that angle, and we might only get a specific photograph from a certain event, and we might have a certain view of what was happening there. And like you said, the second photograph shows a lot more of the energy and of the crowd. Here we see Golda Meir, and she's in the position of the leader who's really going to speak in this event, of course, and everything. But I agree, I think that this photograph is much less powerful maybe than that other photograph with the people. Like you see so many people coming, and just, by virtue of them gathering together is also very powerful. Okay, does someone maybe...
I just have to say that's so fascinating, because I worked with a few students the other week, and I showed them a range of different resources, and none of them chose posters to work with. They were all captivated by the photographs. I think something to do with, emotions and seeing other human beings and being able to relate to it, as opposed to something that perhaps is more, I guess, abstract. So it's fascinating that with a group of adults, the response was that the poster in general, on the whole, I think it seemed like the poster was much more powerful. That was the result. So fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. So if some of you might have already picked up on this in our previous sessions, but when we look at primary sources, we often we like to divide it into these 4 stages. And what we did up until now is really our first impression of the posters or the photographs. That was in the observing part. And we'll talk a little bit later about the creating, how, again, when students need to choose what to create or to think about a message that they want to convey that would be relevant for them, what do they choose? What's the medium that they choose? So moving on to a little bit to the story of Generation 1.5, or as they, this is a quote from people from the movement called Generation 1.5, people who were born mostly in the former Soviet Union, and they're part of Israeli society. And of course, they speak Hebrew, they go to the army, they're just an integral part of society and all aspects. But there is a feeling that to some degree they needed to sort of hide some of their Russian culture or Russian identity when they came to Israel. I think many immigrants feel that when they come to a new country, and in Israel this is also very common, that each aliyah that comes to Israel sort of has to deal with that issue. And Generation 1.5 is a movement that really wants to reconnect to their traditions, to their cultural baggage, as they call it. And I think that what's very powerful about Generation 1.5, it's people that aren't only integrated in Israeli society, but they really believe that being part of Israeli society is important, and they believe in the ability of Israeli society to really be a model society, and part of what their effort is to change the way people treat others and the way each group in Israel can really express their unique identity. So it's not just, I would say, a movement that's saying, you know, people who came from the former Soviet Union or people who are of Russian descent should really reconnect to their culture. It's also a lot about just enabling anyone to connect to their culture that they've come from, and to appreciate that Israel is full of people who come with baggage and with another identity. A lot of the things that they do have to do with Russian culture, but also the video we saw in the beginning of this session that sort of tackles a lot of the misconceptions that people have about Novy God is part of an initiative that's called Israeli Novy God, where Russian families actually host Israeli families, and there's a whole website, and soon we'll see a couple of things from there, a whole website in Hebrew. It only exists in Hebrew, and it caters to an Israeli audience to show them what Novy God is, to explain what the difference between Novy God is and the Christian New Year, and we'll get to that in a moment, and many other events that really have to do with showcasing what the people who came from the former Soviet Union have contributed to society, to Israeli society, and in general. So that's Generation 1.5. You can read more about them. These quotes are taken from Shachari. What I wanted to show you is a few snippets from some newspaper articles about how Novy God is changing and in Israeli society. I would say in the past 20 years or so, but Generation 1.5 has been most active, I would say, in the past 5 years. Here you see there's a request for Novy God to be part of the Holiday of Holidays. Maybe some of you are familiar with this term. In Israel, there's a really beautiful initiative that combines Hanukkah, Ramadan, and Christmas. Ramadan doesn't always fall out in the same time of year, but it often does fall in the same time of Hanukkah and Christmas. And so there's a request here to also include Novy God, which would be part of those celebrations. This is about the initiative we just spoke about helping Israelis get to know what Novy God is. And I would say to, again, tackle some of the misconceptions that have to do with this holiday. We saw in the beginning in the Mentimeter that for most of you, or for many of you, the evergreen tree is associated with Christmas. And in Israel, anything that has to do with Christianity, of course, comes with a lot of antagonism, or at least with a lot of hesitation for the most part. And I'm not talking about the Christians who live in Israel. That's a different story. But in the public realm, there have been attempts to have Christmas trees in various places in Israel, and that wasn't a simple thing. And for the most part, it's something that you don't see in the public sphere. Israeli society, I would say, is very, very much there's a lot of baggage that comes with Christian symbols. And part of, I think, what happened with Novy God is almost like what happens with our posters that we just saw. There's that first impression, there's that emotion that really comes straight to mind. And when people saw what Novy God was for the first time, they immediately associated it with Christianity, with Christmas, with other things that for them in Israeli society were unacceptable. And so I think that now there's, over again, the past few years for sure, there's an ongoing process of really unpacking that and dealing with that and trying to be more open to see that Novy God maybe has some similarities to New Year's and Christmas as Christian holidays, but to understand that Novy God has nothing to do with Christianity, and it comes to celebrate life and celebrate family and celebrate the new year, which is something that many, many Israelis can, of course, identify with. And it's not something that should be banned. I've read things that people have written from Generation 1.5 about how they, as children, it was a very important holiday for their parents, but they knew that it wasn't acceptable. So they would close the drapes to their house when they were celebrating Novy God, just to make sure that no one would actually see that that's what they were doing. And what's so sad about that is that these are people who in the former Soviet Union had to hide their Judaism. They had to celebrate the Jewish holidays in hiding. So here they come to Israel and they have to hide this piece of their identity, which again has really nothing to do with Christianity, and the opposite. Like we said, it's one of the only holidays that was even allowed in the Soviet regime, and it was a secular holiday, and that's the only reason that it was permitted. So I think that here's a text from someone who was born in the former Soviet Union, came to Israel and became a conservative rabbi. And what she's saying is, maybe it's time to look at Novy God just like any other holiday in the Jewish calendar. We even know that Hanukkah, which we're going to be celebrating in a couple of days, was obviously not written in the Bible. It was something that people decided was worthwhile commemorating and celebrating. And of course, it also has roots in some customs that were part of other cultures. And like many things in Judaism, we take and we pick and choose from the cultures we live in. And that's what makes Judaism evolve over the years. And so what she's arguing is maybe Novy God also can become kosher, quote unquote, as a holiday that can really not only be acceptable for Russian Jews, but in general can really become part of mainstream Israeli culture and the Israeli calendar. So in that regard, I want to show you, again, this is all in Hebrew because it's taken from that website I was telling you about, the Israeli Novy God. But just to give you a glimpse, and you see like the images are self-explanatory, but to give you a glimpse into this attempt of Generation 1.5 to show that Novy God can indeed be part of Israeli culture and the Israeli calendar. So if you notice, this is called Seder Novy God. Seder, again, we're getting back to Pesach, to Passover. And for those of you who are in the session about Sigd as well, you might notice that also when we spoke to Yuvi about the Sigd, she presented a Haggadah, a Seder Sigd that they created in order to really make that holiday part of the Jewish calendar and the Israeli calendar. So we can see that labeling something as a Seder really gives it that extra kind of status as something that's acceptable and something that has its pieces, its rules. Seder, of course, in Hebrew means order. So there's a certain order, there's a certain sequence of events that happens on Novy God. So Seder could be, for, again, an Israeli audience, let's make some order here. Like, let's tell you what Novy God is and what it's made out of. But also that word Seder goes straight to the Leila Seder, to the Seder night of Passover, and it really sends a message. It sends a message of, we want to be part of the Israeli calendar and the Jewish calendar. And again, I think that the story of the Soviet Jewry really relates time and again to this concept of freedom. And that's what we celebrate over Pesach. So I think that it's not a coincidence that this is called Seder Novy God. So as you can see, there are different parts and aspects of this holiday: decorating the yolka, inviting guests, and making a toast for the new year, having a festive meal, and hearing stories from grandparents and parents from their past. And then usually there's a famous speech from someone in Russia. Here they have a little joke. You can listen to Putin. That's always funny, but maybe it's better to listen to Rivlin, to our president. And then, as you can see on the clock, the festivities start at 11 p.m. and go until midnight. And then, of course, there's a toast for the new year. And the blessing for Novy God is Snovim Godom, which means Happy New Year. And many times, like we said, the end of the evening is watching nostalgic films or singing and dancing things from the Russian culture. So as you can see, this is really an interesting shift that we see in Israeli society, where more and more people want to show that Novy God can be, in fact, part of our calendar. It can be shared not only by people who came from that background, but it can be shared by all Israelis. It's a holiday that everyone can relate to. And I think it's important for people to understand that in Israel, it's not that the January 1st means nothing, because we all have our calendars set to, the year. January is a thing. We pay our taxes till the end of December and all of that. But to say that I would say there's still controversy about what happens on January 1st as New Year's. And I think Novy God is a really nice opportunity to adopt the celebrating of the new year, the new calendar, without that baggage from feeling that maybe this is like connected somehow to Christmas or something that's called Sylvester, which in Israel is associated with January 1st, and for many people really symbolizes Christian ideas, or someone in the past from that wasn't friendly to Jewish communities. So I think that what we see is this attempt to sort of shed people's misconceptions and stereotypes. Moving on.
Shuvi, there are quite a few interesting discussion questions coming up in the chat box from Judy in particular.
Do share.
So if we go a bit backwards, so she started off asking, how do they claim a Jewish identity? How much of what they want to preserve is not Jewish? Mentioning that a significant amount of the immigrants were not or are not halakhically Jewish. How does it work with the fact that many of the traditions mimic or are taken directly from Christianity? You kind of touched on some of these things. This is an interesting one. Did Novy God exist as a holiday before the Soviet Revolution, or was it created as a substitute for Christmas, since they couldn't get rid of Christmas entirely? Is there an Ashkenazic versus Sephardic divide in receptivity to the holidays? And how is Novy God, you just mentioned this, similar or different from Sylvester?
Okay, so there are a lot of questions. I don't know if I'm able to answer all of them. Like especially the question about different parts of Russia. I think it's a really good question. If we see, like, I don't know, in the big cities as opposed to maybe more rural communities in different areas, maybe in the eastern part of Russia, I don't know. I do want to say something about the connection to Christmas. It's important, first of all, to also remember that like many holidays, even like Hanukkah, for instance, that we celebrate light, in many cultures, there are similar celebrations at the similar time of year because it's the beginning of the winter. So it's true that some of the symbols are similar to Christmas, but some are rooted in in different mythology of like Slavic mythology, like Ded Moroz and Snegurachka. They're like characters that, again, I'm sure that the grandfather, right, who comes and bears gifts for the children, is some concept that obviously also made its way into Christmas and to other customs. But again, it's important to understand that when people celebrate Novy God, their mindset is it's not celebrated as a Christian holiday at all, and it has nothing to do with Christ, and it has nothing to do with all of those aspects of Christmas. And again, I think that even if we think about Hanukkah, which is a very much a similar themes of light and life, during the winter when it starts getting darker, we see very, very early midrashim about that idea that even Adam, the first person, Adam Arishon, he felt that it was getting darker and he felt the need to light a candle and make light because he was feeling that the world was coming to an end. So different customs that have to do with light and growing and life during this time of year are not uncommon. Of course, we can see similarities, but I think that's exactly part of what our job is to do now, is to sort of try to put those associations aside, because for the people who came from the former Soviet Union, and when I spoke to a lot of people, they say that it was so far from anything Christian, and then the opposite. That was their rebellion against other religions. And it's really important to remember, someone commented about that, about how Jewish, how strong is their Jewish identity, even when they came to Israel. I think that people's solidarity with the Jews from the USSR was so great, and it was clear that they were being oppressed and being forced to sort of erase a lot of their Jewish identity over the years. And so I think we just have to keep that in mind, that this is a community that suffered a lot when it comes to expressing their Jewish identity, and they came from a place that any religious identity was really banned, and so we're talking about a few generations of people who suffered from that. So of course there are a lot of questions about Jewish identity when they came to Israel, but also I would say that's not uncommon with a lot of other aliyot. That's always a question, and that's always maybe a concern for a lot of people in Israel. But I want to believe that today people can also appreciate that for the most part, we're talking about people who are part of Israeli society and are contributing so much to society, to us as a society, and have so much valuable cultural baggage, as it were, to bring to Israel. And just think about how many musicians and scientists and doctors and people who really were brought with them so much culture and so much added value. So I don't want to go into all the halachic questions.
Sylvie, Judy wanted to ask a question.
Yeah.
So go for it. Go for it, Judy.
Hi, Shuvi. Thank you so much for letting me inundate you with questions. As an American Jew and as an educator and library director for my synagogue, it's really hard for me. I appreciate everything that you're saying, but it's really hard for me to accept this because we spend so much of our time trying to get American Jewish kids to buy into Hanukkah and not some kind of Christmas imitation of Hanukkah, like books like Shmelf the Elf, and I know an old lady who swallowed a dreidel and all that kind of stuff. And, and all of our intermarried families or even not intermarried families that all have Christmas trees and all this kind of stuff. So I'm feeling a lot of resistance to this just because as an educator, I'm trying to get kids not to buy into this kind of stuff. So that's why I was kind of asking about the Ashkenazic versus Sephardic divide. I would think it would be much harder for Ashkenazim to be receptive to this holiday than say Sephardim or the Mizrahim who don't have this as much of a strong association with Christmas. So you can tell me.
So, thank you, Judy, for your comment. And I think that what you're saying really highlights that in Israel, we don't deal as much with that issue that you're speaking about, families that maybe celebrate Christmas or Hanukkah, or those combinations that you were talking about. And I think that's what makes it in Israeli society that much more complicated, but also simple in that respect. Meaning, I totally hear you, and I think that living in the States or in other countries, it's a real challenge. Like, is Hanukkah like Christmas and Christmas like Hanukkah, and it's all the same? I've been hearing a lot of educators dealing with that issue of how do you deal with a lot of these questions that kids are celebrating both, celebrating only one. I think in Israel, for the most part, we don't really have a community of people celebrating Christmas. And that's, I think that's why people from generation 1.5 and others feel that Novy God can really become the secular holiday it is in Israel. It doesn't need to have that association to Christmas, that strong association. It could really enter the Israeli calendar as just celebrating the new year, like that, just that, and as it was in Soviet Russia, and not to sort of pile onto it all those other emotions and all the other things that come with it. I really understand that outside of Israel, the situation is very different. I'm assuming that there are some people who might feel that people outside of Israel are actually more tolerant to Christmas. They also see Christmas maybe to some degree as a more secular holiday, maybe a consumer holiday at this point in some places where everything's red and green and you can get your Starbucks coffee with, all the decorations, and that's fine. Like, you don't see it as, someone's trying to, convince me to become, to believe in Jesus or something like that. Like, no one's so frantic about that. And I think in Israel, again, to some degree, there's a stronger emotion, and to some extent, it doesn't have to be something that intimidates people as much. And again, it's a gradual process. I agree. I don't think it works for everyone. I think a lot of people are still in the place where they're very much against it, and they can't see how it can be incorporated. And I think a lot of people are opening up to it, and that's where we're at. Who knows where we'll be in another 20 years? Things do take time. So we only have a few more minutes, and I want to go through a couple more things before we finish the session. So here are just a few ideas about how we can take what we've learned today and implement it with students. After maybe seeing posters or photographs, think about something that is important to them and how they would express that, whether it be in a poster or an infographic, or maybe writing a letter or on social media about something that they really want to impact. If it's a social issue, a political issue, I think that the story of the movement of the Soviet Jewry really teaches us the power of protest and coming together, united, and really making a huge impact on something that was important to so many people. I just want to show you that we do have all the links in the presentation to various sources and various things. And I just want to sort of give you a taste of a couple of things that you'll see in these links. One of them is our source sheet on what is your Exodus story, which really brings together text from the Haggadah and from the Bible, from Tanakh, and really ties it all into the civil rights movement in the United States, and also to the Soviet Jewry movement. And some of the things that we've seen today are also incorporated in this source sheet, which is basically almost like a lesson plan that you can really use with your students. And of course, you can pick and choose some of these sources. You don't have to use them all. There's plenty of sources here. Another thing that I just want to share, again, you have the link, is a cool game that we've created for Novy God. And this is the one of the stages in the game. The game is really built on learning about different figures, different characters who came from Russia, and what they contributed to Israeli society. So just as an example, Eliezer ben Yehuda, you can learn about him. This is at the end of the game, just a way to sort of learn more about each one of these characters. So it links straight into our website where you can really see more information about, for instance, Ida Noodle. And you can see here that there's more and more information about the photo and about her story and the Soviet Jewry movement, etc. So that's just to sort of give you a glimpse into the things that you have here on the links. Again, if there are any more comments or questions, we're putting the feedback form in the chat box, and we would really appreciate to hear more from you, what you thought, and you know, we're nearing the middle of this series that we've launched, and it's really important for us to hear from you as educators on the ground. Is this something that's useful, interesting? Is it inspiring you to do some of these things in your classroom or in your educational framework? How do you think this would sit with your learners? What you think you can take from this? What more you would need? So again, we're really, really happy to hear comments and suggestions. We might have time for maybe one more comment, and then we'll be finished. Anyone? I see there are a lot of things popping up in the chat box, but I can't see them. So I think I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment. And if there's anyone who just wants to say something or share an idea, comment, an insight, something you're taking with you from this session. Okay, so thank you everyone for participating. We'll be sending you the recording, and of course you can share that with others. And we'll be sending you the presentation as well. And in the meantime, I hope that everyone has a great Hanukkah with a lot of light and a great new year. Enjoy your time with your families, and I hope everyone's in good health. Bye.